work and there was a ghost in the sound system and I was like munching on cookies. Like right that, you ever done that? Okay, so this morning what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about Saul, and we're in a series called Lead, and today we want to just get into that and get a little plugged into what it means to lead, because we've been saying this. We've been saying that every one of us has been given the responsibility to lead. And so we've been looking at what that means. And so today what we want to do is we want to parallel the life of Anakin Skywalker, right? Darth Vader. And we want to parallel that life with that of King Saul. Okay? And the thing about Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, that you all probably know, is that Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, is like this iconic image of somebody that started off good, right? Started off just about as good as you can get, and then went bad. And Saul is very, very similar, because Saul is one of these guys that started off really good and really strong, and then there was one change, one hairline crack in Saul's heart, and all of a sudden he was as bad a dude as you could be. Right? He just went as bad as you could get because of one small thing. So what we want to do today is we just kind of draw a circle around that. We want to try to figure out what happened in Saul's life to have him go from a path that was good to a path that was very bad. And so we're going to look at the life of Saul. Now, and we're going to parallel that with Anakin. Now, the thing about Anakin is, you probably know, when Anakin was a kid, he started off just like all of us, right? He was an innocent kid. I think we got a picture of him up there, isn't he? He actually reminds me a lot of me when I was a kid. I was the happiest, chubby little kid, and I couldn't act worth a darn just like he couldn't. And you know what I mean? And so anyway, there was this innocence. You probably remember that. I just remember frolicking around in the cornfields of western Nebraska, just as innocent and ignorant as could possibly be. You remember being innocent? And even though there was like darkness all the way around me, and there was like evil that I could probably, it was just outside my front door, I didn't understand it. I didn't get it. And so it had no power over me. It had no control over me, because I didn't understand it, because I wasn't tempted by it. And then as I began to grow up, and all of us are in this same category, we begin to grow up, we begin to connect, we begin to get a little older, and all of a sudden we get it, and we understand it, and all of a sudden it tempts us. At best it tempts us, and at worst a lot of times it controls us. So we're going to look at Saul, and we're going to look at that transition he made from that to this, right? Just in case you didn't know, like this is a little bit of a spoiler alert if you haven't seen Star Wars in the last, 40 years? Anyway, Anakin's Darth Vader, right? He goes bad. He all of a sudden just is as bad as you can get. And this is very similar to the life of King Saul. So we want to talk about how that works and where that started. And that starts with Saul in one particular instance. As you might remember from last week, Saul was like appointed king. He was doing God's work. He was on target. He was just like headed in the right direction. And then this story happens. Saul decides to take on the Philistines, right? And these guys are the big boys, right? This would be like Mexico deciding to wage war on the United States of America, right? It would be kind of entertaining, but it wouldn't last very long, right? And this is exactly what this is like. So the Israelites attack. Jonathan takes 1,000 men and he attacks one of the garrisons in the Philistine territory. And all of a sudden the Philistines are like, we're going to go teach them a lesson, right? So if you were president and Mexico attacked like El Paso, what would you do? My thought pattern, if I was president, I'd be like, we've always kind of wanted Mexico anyway, right? So we just go down there and take it, right? That's kind of how the Philistines look at this attack from the Israelites. They're like, what? They're attacking us? We're going to go teach them a lesson. And so they come out cutting a broad swath. They come out with 3,000 chariots. Now a chariot in ancient war days is like the Apache helicopter of warfighting, right? One chariot is worth 10 soldiers, at least. They come out with 3,000. They have all these foot soldiers on top of that. And they line up against Israel's best, which was probably somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. So Israel, to say the least, is outmanned and outgunned. But this is kind of normal for Israel. Right? From their very inception, when they became a nation, about 400 or 500 years previous to this, God said, I'm going to send you into this land, and I'm going to fight with you. Like, you're going to go up against battles, and there's a lot of times you're going to be outmanned and outgunned, and you're going to have to count on me. You're going to have to look to me by faith. And if you do, I'm going to come along and I'm going to help you out. And so Israel has all of these stories of people, just amazing stories. You kind of read the book of Judges sometime. These just amazing stories of God coming in and saving the day. The little dog, Israel, is up against the big dog. And so, as they're looking at this Philistine army, they're probably going around saying to each other, remember what God has done, right? Remember Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David, and be strong. God's going to fight for us if we will just be faithful. And the battle cry of the Israelites was, the battle belongs to the Lord. So they're looking at this Philistine army, and they're scared, but they know if God will show up, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. And then comes a message from Samuel. Now, Samuel is very much the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this story, okay? Samuel is this older guy filled with a lot of wisdom, but he's more than that. Samuel is the prophet. He is the mouthpiece of God. And he says, in 7 days, I'm going to come to you. If you can just hold on for 7 days, I'm going to come. I'm going to offer a sacrifice to God. And then God's going to be with you, and you're going to be able to attack the Philistines, and you're going to take them to town, right? And they're like, okay, so we'll just wait for 7 days, okay? Long time in front of an army that's getting ready to attack at any moment. Now, the thing about that sacrifice is, and this is crucial to understand, only one person gets to offer that sacrifice, and it's Samuel. It's very, very specific who can offer the sacrifice. It's only a priest, and this time, it's only Samuel. So they're waiting around for 7 days, waiting for him to come. And the end of 7 days comes, and Samuel is a little bit late, right? So they're just waiting for them. And for them, for the men, for the troops, everything is riding on this. Samuel comes and offers the sacrifices. We win! And so they're waiting, and they're waiting, and waiting, and then Samuel doesn't come, and all of a sudden the people begin to freak out. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 13, it says this, verse 6. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical, and that their army was hard-pressed, right? In other words, they're just waking up and they're going, wait a minute, we're just a puny army getting ready to get mowed down. When they saw that their situation was critical and their army was hard-pressed, they hid in the caves and the thickets and among the rocks and in the pits and cisterns. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. And this, don't miss this point, this is where it happens. Saul's beginning to watch his men run away and flee, and he's in that situation where he doesn't know what to do, and the ultimate thing is, he's afraid. He is shaken in his boots, afraid, because he doesn't know what's going to happen. And he waits, and he waits, and he waits. Now this is important, because so many things in life, so many problems come in this life when we get scared, when we get afraid, when we don't know what to do, when we're watching all of our men leave, or we're watching all the things in our life just kind of erode around us. All of a sudden we get afraid, and when we get afraid, a lot of times we start doing really stupid things, right? And for Saul's getting ready to make the biggest mistake of his life. He is going to make a big, big mistake, and then he is going to keep making that mistake and keep making that mistake over and over and over again, and it's going to literally drive him insane, and it all comes down to this: fear. And he starts making decisions based on fear. And so there's a great theologian that kind of sums up Saul's life. That great theologian is Yoda. And Yoda basically sums up Saul's life like this: fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering, right? That's basically his whole life, just in that progression. He gives into fear over and over again, and all of a sudden you see Saul, and just his whole life is just jealousy and anger and frustration because he's afraid. And today when we talk about the darkness within, that's what we want to talk about with you. You have that same hairline crack, that same flaw in your heart that allows fear to come in and drive everything that you do. Now you might be sitting out there going, fear? Fear is the darkness within? That's the thing that changed Saul? That's the thing that changed our life? Absolutely. Because when you think about what fear is, think about what it really means. I've got two definitions. These aren't like perfect, but these are kind of two definitions of when you think about what fear really is. The first one is fear is the ultimate self-preservation. Right? Because what's Saul thinking as these men are getting ready to leave him? He's thinking, what about me? Like, what happens to me? What if all my men leave and the Philistines capture me? What happens to me? And I can't lose. I can't have that happen to me. And so it's ultimately looking at his own life and his own personal interest. And this is probably a bigger definition. Fear discounts God's existence. Right? It doesn't discount like your belief in God. I'm talking about for you, if you operate out of fear, it discounts that God even exists. And Saul's standing there right there in this moment, and if he would have just like been assured that no matter what happens, God is in control, he would have been fine. He would have been okay, because guess what? Samuel's almost there. He doesn't even know it. Samuel's almost there. I have a friend in AA, been in AA for years. He says kind of one of the mantras in AA goes like this: you're 5 minutes away from a breakthrough. Right? They say that to each other all the time. You're 5 minutes away from a breakthrough. Saul, in this situation, is literally 5 minutes away from a breakthrough. If he would have just held on, put his trust in, and believed in God, he would have been all right. But instead, he makes a huge, huge mistake. Here's what he does. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offerings. Now, I don't know if you can catch that. That was a huge mistake. That would be like if I was like, you know what, I'm a little behind and I can't pay one of my bills this month, and you know, I do a lot for the church and everything. I think I'm just going to go over to the buckets after the offering's been taken up, and I'm just going to grab $500 out of there, right? Because the end justifies the means, right? And that would have been, like, to me, I could have justified that in my head, maybe. I won't do that, but I could justify that in my head. But what if John Perfetti, one of our soon-to-be elders, comes up and he's like, what are you doing? I was like, well, you know, it kind of the ends justify the means. And he was like, he would, I know John, he'd be like, no, you just messed up everything. You just like took everything we had going on and you completely wrecked it. And that's exactly what Samuel says to Saul. He arrives as Saul is getting done making the sacrifice, this offering, and he says, what have you done? Why did you do this? And Saul says, he's very candid, he says, well, I was afraid. I was afraid all my men were leaving. We lost heart. I didn't know what to do. So he follows after that because he's driven based on the fear. And then the rest of his life is lived that way. Every function of his life is lived in that order. And I want to give you a couple of examples of that. The next thing God asked him to do, he says, hey, I want you to go up against the Ammonites, and I want you to like completely destroy them. I want you to go in. That's just how God rolls. He was like a nuke them till they glow type of philosophy, okay? I want you to go in there. I don't want you to leave any sheep alive. I don't want you to leave any soldiers alive. I don't want you to take captive anybody. I just want you to go in there, and I want you to destroy all of them. And Saul says, okay. So he goes in there, and he destroys almost all of them, but then he brings back some sheep, and he brings back the king. And Samuel comes up to him again, and he's like, what have you done? Why did you do that? This was so easy. All they had done. Now listen to Saul's explanation of why he didn't do it. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I have violated the Lord's command and your instruction. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. You know, getting back to leadership, like if you want to lead anybody, you can't be afraid of the people you lead, right? Like some of y'all scare me to death, right? But you can't be afraid of the people that you lead, right? He says, I was afraid of them, and so I gave in. And so, again, you see Saul make a decision based on fear. And then finally, as he goes through his life, decision after decision after decision, just his heart filled with anger and jealousy. Finally, we get to 1 Samuel 28. And this is at the end of his life. And the Philistine army is again with him. Now, keep in mind that Saul reigned for like 40 years. So this is like a 40-year reign of just completely fear-based decisions. At the end of his life, the Philistines are on him again. And he says this, verse 28, verse 5. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he was 40 years, and you're still afraid? He saw the Philistine army, and he was afraid, and terror filled his heart. And the more and more Saul has done to try to make this fear go away, the more and more and more it exists. Verse 6. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him. You got to understand, at this point, God's just kind of like, I've tried to give you everything I can give you. I've tried to lead you in every way I can possibly lead you. And now, you're just so afraid. And so he's offering it. He says, the Lord did not answer him by dreams or by, did not answer him. And you got to understand, at this point, Samuel's dead. So he can't even go to Samuel and ask him about it. Saul then said to his attendants, find me a woman who is a medium. Basically, find me a witch, so I may go and inquire of her. And they said, there is one in Endor. Okay, I got to make the connection. Everybody know the connection right now? You got to believe that George Lucas had a Bible, right? Yes, Endor. Endor is where the Ewoks live. And so they were it has really no spiritual depth or application here. But they say, yeah, there's a witch in Endor. And so he goes to this witch. Okay, now this is the bottom of the bucket. Because one of the things that Saul did when he first became a king is he got rid of all the witches and all the mediums and all the... But he is so desperate that he goes to a witch. And he says, I want you to do something for me. I want you to bring up a spirit. I want you to bring somebody up from the dead. And she says, who do you want? He said, I want Samuel. Samuel always gave me the best wisdom. So she goes and she brings Samuel up from the dead, right? It says this literally worked. Samuel comes up out of the ground and speaks to Saul, and what does he have to say to him? What have you done? Even from the grave, right? It's like that interaction with my mom. My whole life, my mom was like, make your bed, clean your room, make your bed, clean your room. And if all of a sudden one day I brought my mom up from the grave, she's not dead, by the way, but if I brought her up from the grave, she'd be like, clean your room, make your bed, right? This is Samuel. He's like, what have you done? You've made another huge mistake. And he says, and this is what Samuel says to him. He says, tomorrow you're going to die. You're afraid? You're filled with terror, and guess what? Tomorrow, you die. And so the next day, he goes into battle, he fights, and he dies. And so passes Saul. Now, here's what I want to do with that story. I want to come to you guys, and we are very, very much like that. Right? We see all the events in our life, and we worry all the time, and we worry about finance, and we worry about money, and we just worry. And we get filled with this fear about what's going to happen, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen next. And then we make the critical error. This is where it happens. It's not wrong to be afraid of something. What's wrong is to make a decision based on fear. All right, when I was at Mount Vernon, there was this lady who we just kind of helped out all the time. She was an older lady, and she grew up in the Depression, right? But she was just constantly needing help. So people in the church would bring her groceries, and they would try to hook her, and they'd take her out to eat, and they'd drive her from A to B, and they'd give her gas money and stuff. When she died, they went into her house. Her sons and daughters went into her house to clean up. They found a bowling bag with $27,000 in it. Right? In bills, small bills, all pressed down, perfectly tight. Some of them 30, 40-year-old bills pressed down. They went up into her attic. They were digging around in the attic. Guess what? They found another $17,000 in her attic. And she had lived her whole life based on fear. And so many of us, that's exactly the situation where we're just hoarding the best in life because we are afraid. When the problem really comes is when we make decisions based on fear. Now, the thing about it is There's only one way to get rid of fear, right? And we've got a couple of reasons that are not good reasons, right? These are not ways that get rid of fear. Optimism doesn't work, right? Just, oh, look on the bright side of life, right? That may help you feel better, but ultimately that doesn't help you out at all. That doesn't overcome your fear. That just refocuses you for a little bit. Because there's times in life, and many of you experienced it, when there's not a bright side to look on, or there's not very much of a bright side. The next one that doesn't work is it doesn't work to just don't be afraid, right? I love roller coasters. Raise your hand if you love roller coasters, right? Absolutely love roller coasters. My children are all terrified of roller coasters. And we live 3 hours from Cedar Point, and it's driving me crazy, right? I haven't been there yet. If your family goes on a vacation to Cedar Point, I'll go with you. Because I'll just ditch my family and I'll be like there with I'll watch your kids for you if you want or something, but I just, to go to Cedar Point. And I can't get my kids to do it. And every time we go to a roller coaster or anything, I just turn to them and they're like, I'm afraid. And I turn to them and what do I say as a dad? Don't, right? Don't be afraid. You wuss, right? Isn't that what a good father says, right? I'm going to write a parenting book one day, but anyway. Suck it up. Get on the roller coaster. It's going to be fine. Don't be afraid. That never, ever, ever works. They can't. It's not possible. And we, even as adults, we have it's not possible for us to just go, okay, I'm not going to be afraid. So I don't want you to get from this message as you walk out of here today that you should go walk out of here going, okay, I'm not going to be afraid. That's not what we're getting at. There's only one way to overcome fear, and that's this: faith. That's the only way. We were put on this earth, and the only way to overcome all the fears and things that we face in our life is to believe that God's in control. No matter what happens or what goes on in our life. Think about your life. How different would your life be if you made every decision up until this point in your life knowing that no matter what happened, God was in control? Some of you right now may be in relationships based on a fear. Like, well, he's not perfect, but I don't want to be alone. Right? You have a fear of being alone, and so you ended up with, him, right? So some of you are in relationships because you didn't want to spend the rest of your life in a bad marriage, and maybe you made a decision. You said, I don't want to be with him, and so you make that alone. Some people are in relationships when they're dating, and they're just like, it's probably not the healthiest relationship. It's not the best, but I don't want to be alone. And we live our life based on these fear principles. How different would your life be right now if every time you came up against a juncture like that, you said, I believe that God is in control, and I'm going to make the right decision, and it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm afraid of or what I fear. So if we could just give you a couple action points as you're going to go out throughout your week, we want you to do this. We just want you to analyze your life. We want you to analyze every time you make a fear-based decision. Whatever it is that you decide, maybe it's something that with your kids, maybe it's something with the people around you, maybe it's something about your finances, whatever it is, you're going to come up against this opportunity this week where you just look at your life and go, I think I'm completely basing this decision on my fears. I want you to look at every one of those decisions, and the second thing we want you to do is we want you to turn that fear, that anxiety, that frustration, we want you to turn that in a simple way into faith, into trust in God. Even if you're not there yet, even if you really haven't really bought into this whole Jesus thing, you're just kind of coming along and you're walking along, even if you haven't done there yet, try it. Just try it. When you come up to a place where you're afraid or you have fear, turn that into faith and trust in God. When we first started this church, I had a lot of anxiety because I wasn't sure whether I should do it or whether I should be a part of it or how we were going to do it or what the outcome was going to be, right? And so I had a lot of anxiety about that. And so what I started doing is I would just simply in the morning before anything else happened, before I got out of bed, before I said good morning to my wife, before I drank coffee, I would just kind of put my hands in the air. Still laying there in bed, I would just put my hands in the air. And I got to be honest with you, at that hour in the morning, I'm too tired to even say anything, right? You ever tried to pray right when you wake up in the morning? That goes kind of like this. Dear God, be careful. That doesn't really work, right? And so I would just put my hands in the air, and that's all it was. It was just a gesture of my heart saying, God, you're in control. This is your day. I pray that I would honor everything you do. And that's about all I could get out in the cognitive thought. It was just simply raising my hands and saying, God, I trust in you. So as you go throughout your week, I want you to just, every time you come into any fear-based decision, anything that makes you afraid, turn that into trust in God. Let's pray. Father, you are so much greater than anything that we are afraid of. You are so much bigger. God, you are filled with wisdom, and you love us. And God, we know that whatever we're facing is nothing compared to your greatness. So we put our trust in you. We pray that you just help us to believe in you despite our fears. And I pray that in Christ's name.